Hello, I'm Rich Newberg, and I've been asked by the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library to share some journalistic observations with you as we honor the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his dream of equality and opportunity for African Americans. As we in Buffalo know only too well, there are forces at work seeking to destroy all the good that has come out of the civil rights movement.
This is the city of justice.
It has been only 8 months since a self-avowed white supremacist took the lives of 10 innocent people at one of the only grocery stores serving Buffalo's inner-city residents. What is needed now?
We need justice in this country. We need history. We need people to learn the truth about history. Let's learn the truth so we can treat each other the way we're supposed to treat each other.
That's what the next 24 minutes are about. Coming to grips with the truth, because no matter what color you are or what your belief system happens to be, the truth, as it has been said, will set you free.
We know that we're oppressed. We know that this is a system that oppresses us.
As an African American individual, black female, I do understand why some protesters may feel that they're still, or we as black people are still oppressed, because to some extent we are.
We shall overcome someday.
And professionally, I think the Buffalo Police Department has done a great job with working with the community, trying to hear the voice of the community. I know the mayor has appointed a commission to examine police policies.
We honor your right to protest, and we will protect your right to protest. But there is no place for agitators who are trying to incite violence and create mischief in our community.
Frustrations over racial injustice and excessive use of force by the police have played out violently on Buffalo streets before. And it is because we have these moving images, this incredible window to the past, that we are able to question just how far we've come during the past half-century.
When I was growing up, the police officer was the enemy, the occupying force.
After witnessing the beating of an innocent black youth in Buffalo during a rock-throwing incident in the late 60s, John Eberhardt decided to take the police exam as an act of self-defense.
I joined the police department to protect myself from the police.
More than 20 years after the riots of the 60s, Buffalo citizens were still demonstrating against alleged police brutality aimed at people of color.
On my face was South Africa, United States. On my face was South Africa, and what's going on all over the world.
Just about 2 weeks after the hearing in Buffalo, Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa visited the Queen City, asking for support in his fight against the official separation of the races in his country.
And we say something that can allow such things to happen is evil.
And he spoke against those who advocate for violence to achieve their goal of white supremacy.
You know what's happened in your own country to people who have been involved in the civil rights movement, what's happened to people like Martin Luther King Jr.
Archbishop Tutu's visit also put the spotlight on Buffalo's marginalized inner city, where civil rights leaders were worried about a permanent underclass of citizens due to institutional racism.
Racism is still alive and well, but the problem has mushroomed considerably much larger than it was in 1968 for our community.
We say no! We say no! We say no to racism!
This Buffalo rally against racism in January of 1981 drew national attention. About 500 demonstrators confronted white supremacists who threatened to disrupt the city. Only 2 white supremacists showed up.
Heil Hitler.
We put them down. We put the Nazis and the Klan down. We have won the first round.
It was the time when thousands of people from all backgrounds united together in Buffalo. Another time of crisis when black men were being gunned down by Joseph Christopher, the so-called .22 caliber killer who was still at large. The statement behind the rally was profound.
That violence against any one segment of the population is violence against all.
To think of man in terms of white, black, or yellow is more than an error. It is an eye disease, a cancer of a soul.
Surely we must know that racism is the cancer of the American soul.
While trying to drink from a whites-only water fountain during a trip down south, Don Dawkins was yanked away by his fearful mother when he was just a child. He became a TV news photographer at WIVB and was determined to use his skills in Buffalo to confront the reality of racism. Don passed away in 2007, but was successful in highlighting the lives of African Americans in Buffalo who made great contributions to the civil rights movement.
A lot of the stories emanating from predominantly communities of color were negative. And so Don wanted to share positive stories. He used to tell me, we've done stuff, we've done good stuff, but his stories aren't told.
Dawkins created a series of Black History specials, even making cameo appearances as an enslaved man seeking refuge in what was the Michigan Street Baptist Church, built by African Americans in Buffalo.
Come on, little one. That's right.
The church's hidden treasure that these school children are about to discover is beyond a wall in the basement, a dark, damp, chilling glimpse into the past, a sanctuary within a sanctuary, away from the gaze of bounty hunters.
There was a false wall that you could move and push them in there and then move the wall.
Our black young people do not know where they came from. If I don't know where I came from, where am I going?
Thanks to WIVB's willingness to make these stories available to students, Buffalo school children are learning where they came from and about those giants of the civil rights movement, present and past, who made history in Western New York.
Y'all can call me Harry Tubman. See, I'll be the leader of this here outfit.
History is coming alive in a way that no textbook could express.
I'm looking for this woman. Which one of you's Harry Tubman, speaker?
I want you to think of a character trait that you might be able to describe Harriet
and all of her accomplishments with.
She really cared and was confident of risking her life after, even if that was after her.
Might have been maybe a little hard for her because she had to lead a whole bunch of people out of the slavery, and she didn't want to get caught by bounty hunters.
They are even learning that some of Harriet Tubman's descendants settled in Buffalo.
Growing up, the only people who really knew about Harriet Tubman was her family.
Cool that we live in a place where such a mark of history was.
They are particularly intrigued by the story of Arthur Eve as they watch WIVB News highlights of his life.
That people of goodwill will vote for a candidate regardless of race, color, or creed.
The fierce advocate for civil rights had hoped to become Buffalo's first African-American mayor, having served as New York Deputy Assembly Speaker and a negotiator who tried to avoid bloodshed during the Attica prison uprising of 1971. He did not succeed in those efforts, but never gave up the fight for racial justice and equality.
What kind of character traits might you say that Mr. Eve portrays?
He was determined to end segregation, and the other one was that he was a leader because he led the civil rights movement.
So imagine their excitement when they actually met a living legend of the civil rights movement, who also happens to be their school's namesake. They will never forget these observations from Arthur Eve after he looked into their faces.
I see hope. Hope. Absolutely. We will get there. There's no question in my mind that if we keep working hard, we will succeed.
People who cannot remember their past are condemned to repeat it. We're not going back that way.
Well, we did it, didn't we?
At this defining moment, change has come to America.
This is history tonight, and there's no words to describe it.
It is. It's truly. You don't know the feeling that I have at this moment, at being a part of this from the very beginning and being here tonight to know that the next president of these United States will be Barack Obama, the first African-American. It's great. It is really
I want to be remembered as a caregiver, as a wise old man, full of love and hospitality.
Looks like. Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
It's been about 20 years since the civil rights movement spilled into the streets of Buffalo and other major cities across our country. But what happened to the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King since the turbulent 60s? Are Buffalo's black citizens better off now than they were then? Tonight we begin looking for some answers.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
Martin Luther King's dream of equality and opportunity during the March on Washington would lead to black grassroots movements in cities across the country. Buffalo was no exception. The grievances were the same.
Number one, chronic unemployment of adults and teenagers.
teenagers. Number 2, inferior education of 24,000 Negro children.
But when it became apparent that the dream would not become reality overnight, frustrations exploded into violence. 10 years later in Buffalo, the mayoral candidacy of Arthur Eve would signal a change in approach from fighting against the system to seeking political power within the system.
The politics was going to be the way that we were going to gain equality, that we could make justice occur, that we could get rid of discrimination, and that we could get liberated in this society.
8 years later, George Arthur would try and capture the mayor's seat, pledging to unify the city and also direct attention to the lingering problems of the inner city. What was the impact of his candidacy?
I don't think it had any impact. Things have not changed. The powers to be are not more responsive. They're less responsive than, they were in '85.
The same problems on the East Side that caused so much turbulence during the 60s still exist today. Unemployment, poor housing, poverty. Some say things are even worse because many of the businesses that left the inner city following the disturbances never returned.
Look at us. Look where we live in. It's a lot of needs. Stores, you gotta walk about 3 miles to get to a store.
Homeless people, they need shelter and food.
What we need, y'all, is keep the young people out the street.
Some are pinning their hopes on their black representatives in the Common Council. 6 of the 13 lawmakers are black. The majority leader is Jim Pitts, whose style may be of the 60s, but whose eye, he says, is focused on the 80s and beyond. Tomorrow night at 6, his views on what happened to the dream. And on this day, we remember the assassination of President John Kennedy, who made civil rights and aid to depressed areas a part of the national agenda. On November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy was shot while riding in an open car in Dallas. He died a half hour later. Kennedy had called his domestic program The New Frontier, challenging Americans to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
In the streets of Buffalo 20 years ago, black citizens were demanding an active role in government decisions affecting their lives. They were pursuing the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King, a dream of equality and opportunity. Rich Newberg tells us what happened to that dream.
It was a violent summer in Buffalo in 1967. The East Side exploded with frustration. A third of the black community was believed to be on welfare, and the prospect for jobs did not look good. During this time, a teenager from the Fruit Belt, Jim Pitts, helped organize a coffee house where young blacks would meet, searching for solutions to the problems tearing their community apart.
We were very serious and we wanted to do things for the community. And in fact, out of that coffee house, we developed a youth employment placement program which hired some almost 300 youth.
We're going to the mayor's office and then to the Chamber of Commerce.
It was a time when blacks in Buffalo, along with blacks across the country, began feeling their own sense of power, demanding that City Hall be responsive to their needs. Frank Sedita was mayor then.
What is going to happen to the 15% unemployment in our ghetto areas? Bill's position is that we are concerned about permanent jobs.
Plans are underway to find out just how many jobs eventually will be available.
Today, unemployment in Buffalo's inner city is estimated to be twice as high as in white neighborhoods.
What we're trying to do at this time, Mr. President, is try to keep downtown Buffalo alive.
Jim Pitts, who is now majority leader of Buffalo's Common Council, is still demanding that City Hall be responsive to the problems of the inner city.
I think, quite honestly, the only way that we're going to effectively deal with the many problems of the black community is to elect a black mayor, or a mayor who is more sensitive to the needs of the black community.
Change comes slowly on Buffalo's East Side, but there is hope, like this new housing on Pratt Street for low and middle income families. And across the street, a new community recreation center is being built.
Jim Pitts says the greatest challenge now is to convince young black teenagers that Buffalo can be a fine place to live, to pass along the dream of the 60s, that economic prosperity is a goal worth fighting for.
I believe in the phoenix. Out of the ashes comes the reformation.
But there's nobody with a gun or anything, right?
Tomorrow night at 6, a black police officer tries to find out what happened to the dream. Rich Newberg, News 4, Buffalo.
In the city of Buffalo, affirmative action programs have brought some blacks closer to fulfilling the dream of equality and opportunity, the dream expressed by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. more than 20 years ago. One of the most visible changes has occurred in the Buffalo Police Department, which had been the target of a lot of criticism during the turbulent 1960s. Rich Newberg reports in Part 3 of What Happened to the Dream.
When I was growing up, the police officer was the enemy, the occupying force.
After witnessing the beating of an innocent black youth in Buffalo during a rock-throwing incident in the late 60s, John Eberhardt decided to take the police exam as an act of self-defense.
I joined the police department to protect myself from the police.
To some on the street on Buffalo's east side, Lieutenant Eberhardt is now the enemy, although he understands the problems in the neighborhood he patrols.
A lot of people are out doing what they do to survive. People are living below the poverty line.
But Lieutenant Eberhardt knows that black officers are a welcome sight when there are disturbances in the projects.
These nice, boy. Very nice. I would want to be down here if they were here.
But there's nobody with a gun or anything, right?
Eberhardt was one of only about 24 black officers in the department when he started his career 16 years ago. Now, there are more than 150. For many of the young black officers now joining the force, the 60s were merely a chapter out of history. But they may very well owe their jobs to officers like this man, Ted Kirkland, who served in the department during the civil disturbances in Buffalo and was among those who forced a federal lawsuit against the city over the lack of black officers on the force.
We were attempting to get more black police officers, so that the dream then was that we felt if we did, we could cut down on a lot of police brutality, a lot of abuse that black citizens and others were suffering at that time.
But despite affirmative action and a high profile of blacks in the police and fire department, many believe conditions for Buffalo's black community have gotten worse. The median family income for blacks in the city was a little more than $11,000 in the last census. That's about half the income of white families.
The answer, they say, is in education.
Qu'est-ce que c'est?
And tomorrow night at 6, we'll find out what happened to the dream of desegregation. Rich Newberg, News 4, Buffalo.
At one time, Buffalo was said to have the most segregated school system in the Northeast. But the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. of an integrated society had a profound effect on bringing black and white school children together in our city. Rich Newberg brings us up to date on what happened to the dream.
For today's teenagers in Buffalo, working their way through high school, integration is all they've known. Had they grown up in the 60s on the city's east side, they would have attended all black schools where resources were limited and expectations were low.
Buffalo was bad. Our young were involved in gang activities. The school system was in a deplorable condition.
Florence Baugh was president of the Buffalo School Board when the federal court sent down its order to desegregate.
Since 1976 to the present time, I think we've seen the most exciting social revolution occur here in the city of Buffalo.
Unlike the violence that accompanied desegregation in cities like Little Rock, Arkansas 30 years ago, when federal troops had to escort 9 black students into the high school, Buffalo's transition was relatively peaceful. What have the last 11 years meant for black students in our city?
We know that the reading scores are up, mathematics scores are up, the dropout rate is down.
But despite the gains, the suspension rate among black students is at least twice as high as among white students. And while the schools may be racially balanced, cultural and economic differences among students can often lead to problems of attitude.
My teacher said I threatened her, and I didn't. I know I didn't.
A special program for troubled students has been created to offer counseling instead of suspension.
We tried to take a look at their attitudes and their behavior patterns and see if there's something that we can do to make adjustments or change it or turn them around.
Qu'est-ce que c'est? To turn it around, a student must want the education, and providing the opportunity is what a quality education is all about. Most seem to agree the system is moving in a positive direction, finally responding to the dream of that great civil rights leader whose vision of the future back in 1963 touched the very soul of our nation.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
Rich Newberg, News 4, Buffalo.